So many of people's perspectives on Dr. K made me so angry. I just like backed away from it.
I think you have a bad understanding of therapy ethics.
I think I have a bad understanding of therapy ethics.
He's not doing therapy, it's mostly education. A lot of you guys know that I actually got a large portion of my initial kind of buzz and blow up through Dr. K. And for those of you who don't know, that's like some of the first big content that I covered and did.
Do you support MrGIRL's war with Dr. K is the question. 70% have said yes.
Okay.
So what I actually want to do today is we'll TLDR you on the Dr. K situation. If you have no idea who that is, I will cover that for you. We're also going to cover what I said about essentially infamous member of the no longer of the community, MrGIRL. Him and I had a very long fight, multiple fights about Dr. K, and I gave my perspective back then, and I want to basically see what was right, what was wrong, and kind of give you guys my thoughts so far on the Dr. K situation. For those of you who are unaware, there was a reprimand made against Dr. K. What is a reprimand? It's basically a official statement from his ethics board saying that he's done something naughty. An important question in all of this is going to be, to what scale does the ethics board think he's done something naughty, and what specifically are they saying that he's done wrong? Okay, so a complaint was made against Dr. K in 2022, and we all know by who. Which is, as I said, the infamous, no longer friend of the stream, this guy. This guy.
He doesn't actually listen to anything anybody says. All of his questions are leading, and it feels like he's on a track. He kind of railroads the person through the conversation, which I really don't like.
And just to make sure, is it considered like criminal, or is it just considered
Yes.
like it's a criminal offense?
It is again, there's a law. It is a criminal offense.
Okay,
Yes.
just clarifying that, because yeah.
TLDR on Max's issues with Dr. K. Who's Max? Max is a creator named MrGIRL. He was very, very kind of up and rising in DGG in 2022. However, he kept on getting banned on multiple platforms because of his style of content. He was very interested in files and talking to files and kind of like making people uncomfortable with that content. And he got really mad at Nick Fuentes at some point, and Nick Fuentes for being a Nazi. And Nick Fuentes mass reported Max's account, which led to his YouTube channels being taken down. So MrGIRL is no longer on the scene, in large part because of a major split that happened between him and Steven. I won't get into it because actually, if you're not aware of it, I think it'll poison the well for this conversation, and it's unrelated to this. And then everything just kind of got nuked. So MrGIRL decided that he hated Dr. K after Steven, who was friends with Max at the time, not even Steven, I think it was Melina, told Max. So Steven's ex-wife told MrGIRL, this guy, that he reminded her of Rekful. Rekful is a now deceased World of Warcraft streamer and stuff who was friends with Steven a long time ago before he died by. And so MrGIRL became very interested in Rekful and his death and all this stuff kind of associated with that. And so he began kind of looking into it further, and he decided that not only was Dr. K a bad therapist, like he was poor at giving therapy, but he was like evil for what he did to Rekful.
If I was trying to get someone with borderline to kill themselves, that's what I would do.
If you watch this full thing, he'll go on at some point to claim that he is at fault for Rekful's suicide.
I would say he's culpable in Rekful's suicide.
Okay.
I wouldn't say he's to blame. I mean,
because Dr. K was talking with and engaging with Rekful about 6 months before Rekful ended up dying by suicide. And this is after multiple attempts by Rekful. I think this was his second or third attempt before he ended up completing, unfortunately. MrGIRL wanted to talk to me about Dr. K on like day 10 of my streaming because he knew that I had, particularly at the time, I was registered as an addictions counselor. I haven't maintained my registry since I moved to Florida, and in Florida, I'm not registered. I don't think there even is one. So I haven't maintained my Alberta registry. And that's like the main thing that he was wanting to pull from my experience from is my addiction counseling practice. However, what we are mostly talking about in this conversation is medical and psychological ethics. And him and I agreed to actually focus on psychological ethics because that's what I'm aware of, because I've been trained in psychological ethics to a graduate degree.
I think you have a bad understanding of therapy ethics.
I think I have a bad understanding of therapy ethics.
And taken some extra, like additional courses about it that were excellent courses. And essentially, Max's criticisms is numerous. Dual relationships is a very important thing for Max. He basically believes that Reckful existed in this ambiguous state between client and like coworker / friend, and that Dr. K kept Reckful in that ambiguous state for his own self-benefit, in a malicious way to clout farm, to grow popularity, but also to have a little bit of like distance of responsibility. Now, to be clear, it is possible that there was a different complaint made than MrGIRL, but it was 2022 when he filed the complaint. He has footage of him submitting it. He's got a massive stack of information. So it's reasonable to conclude that this is the outcome of Max's complaint. This was premiered February 5th, 2022. This is like days, literal, like not even, I think 10 days after I started streaming ever. Just so you guys have a context of like my grounding in the internet space. So this conversation, if you watch it, it's 4 hours long. We will not be covering it all. You're welcome to go back though. It is prime content. And this is like baby Kyla, like me when I'm still just starting to dabble into content. I am literally like 10 days into starting my internet career. It's really interesting watching how good faith I am in this conversation. It's wild. It is an hour of me just asking him questions about his perspective first before I ever give him mine. He never, ever asks for my perspective. And as I begin to give my perspective, he begins to increasingly tell me about how I'm basically a horrible person and probably an unethical practitioner.
That just makes me think that you don't understand that the ethics rules are to protect the client.
And I remember when this conversation happened, my heart was like pounding the whole time. I was so nervous. But I actually did really, really good. Looking back, I'm like, damn. And just in case you guys are not aware, I never got into like formal debate. I was never in debate club. This is like my third debate, like actual like debate ever. I was just a disagreeable person like growing up. So it's very interesting to see how like nasty he was during this whole conversation.
Your statements affect your practice because you are in a public forum.
But you also haven't heard the full form of my statement, right?
It doesn't matter.
Sure it does.
No, it doesn't.
To some extent.
These rules are to protect the client, and it makes me think you don't understand the sanctity of the therapist-client relationship.
And as the Dr. K stuff picked up steam, a lot of people increasingly sided with Max, with some of his viewers actually going on to try to contact my school and previous workplaces to get me in trouble, which was wild. And I guess I'll just start by saying, holy shit, I already told him that he was wrong, but he was so wrong. And it's wild to me the way people were so confidently ignorant and wrong.
So the main problems I have are he did not establish a therapy relationship with Reckful, ever. He told him their ongoing talks after they agreed to keep talking were for the explicit purpose of treating Reckful's depression. So at that moment, whether he says he's doing therapy or not, legally he is his physician.
That is incorrect, just so it's clear.
If somebody thinks you are doing therapy with them, and you are a therapist, you have to either stop what you're doing or become their therapist. If I start saying, wow, this feels really good to talk to you about why I'm so angry about this Dr. K thing. Like, it feels so good to really talk to a professional about this. You are professionally obligated to end the conversation if I say that.
There's definitely nothing in the ethics that outline that clearly. You are professionally obligated to outline to them, I am not your therapist. We are not engaging in therapy.
And legally, he is practicing.
What's also incorrect is Dr. K didn't say that he's treating his depression. Just to be super clear, Max is just wrong about all of this.
And by the way, so a couple of ground rules. So I'm a psychiatrist, but I can't treat your depression over the internet.
Medicine in a state he is not licensed to practice medicine.
Right.
And then 4 sessions later, he's still saying, I want to be your friend, but I want to be your therapist.
The ethics that matter when it comes to this stuff is in large part informed, especially based on this dual relationship stuff, is whether or not Reckfield's a client and whether or not therapy is occurring.
Diagnosing him casually with BPD, then saying borderline personality disorder, then saying maybe you don't have it, maybe you do, maybe I'm...
This did not happen. He told Reckfield about BPD and things about him that are similar to it.
Now, you could, like I said, you could have depression. You could have depression. I don't know that you don't, or bipolar 2. But what I'm saying is that, like, generally speaking, sometimes I talk to people and they say, I've been depressed since I was the age of 14. And if you've constantly been depressed for 15 years, that's not how major depressive disorder works, because our body has...
No, because I've come in and out of it. So I've come out of it when I started photography.
And then also told him about evidence of what helps people with BPD.
Your doctor, maybe I'm not your doctor. You can't do that. You can't diagnose people.
Well, I've been diagnosed with bipolar type 2.
But I'm going to publicly diagnose you and publicly disclose this diagnosis without your consent to thousands of people in real time while taking donations.
I'm going to talk to you about something called borderline personality disorder. I don't think you have this, by the way, and it's not
really
the place to diagnose
okay.
it.
A lot of people think I do have that.
Okay, I don't want to focus in this video too much on Max's perspective. I guess you can put in the comments below if you want me to just review all of these old conversations and basically tell you why he's so wrong again. Basically, Max is wrong about psychology ethics entirely. What's important to me is reminding myself what I said 2 years ago. If you have concerns about ethical behavior, you should always be comfortable filing a complaint. I support you in doing that. It's always good, especially in unprecedented types of mental health like paradigms, like Healthy Gamer and the live streams, to have it ethically vetted by an ethical board. That's a good thing. Like I was fully for him reporting Dr. K. Wasn't worried about it, in large part because I knew that Dr. K was not breaking a bunch of ethics, and he would be given a lot of good advice about the gray areas that he kind of operates within, particularly 2 years ago.
Because one of the big questions that I've been struggling with this whole topic is, what is therapy? Because it's actually a pretty not well-defined thing, right? There's definitions online, but it's an issue that I think this situation with Dr. K highlights to me that our field is woefully unprepared for answering that question, and we need to figure it out in the face of technology.
Okay, I disagree.
That's fair.
So the first issue that I raised about Dr. K is essentially one of the murky things, which is why I wanted this submitted to the ethics board. What is therapy, right? When we didn't exist in such a highly technological world, the answer was kind of simple. You called or found a psychologist, you went into their office for a session, you sit down and talk to them for an hour to an hour and a half, and that's therapy. It's pretty self-evident what it is. Then we moved to telecommunication therapy, but it's kind of the same. You pre-schedule your meeting times, you pre-schedule your conversations, done. Okay, well, what about Dr. Phil? Is Dr. Phil doing therapy? By and large, my understanding with Dr. Phil, I could be incorrect, is that he's not doing therapy. It's mostly education. And he also didn't renew his clinical psychology license, from my understanding, and wasn't required to because they decided, he's not doing therapy. The next question is, with Dr. K's interviews that are very deep and emotional and really help people, is that therapy? Because it certainly looks like therapy, even though there's a disclaimer at the bottom saying this is not therapy, and Dr. K make sure that the person he's talking to knows that they're not doing therapy. The problem is, and this is something I wish I had said more, Dr. K is brilliant at talking to people. He is so good at his job. He is so good at connecting with people that it is therapeutic to talk to them, and they talk about mental health issues. But is it therapy if him and the person agree that it's not therapy, even though it looks like therapy, and he's a psychiatrist who offers therapy, right? And this is why I was like, this is why you should submit this, because if it's therapy and if the people coming on are clients, Dr. K has significantly higher ethical burdens to these people than if it is deemed not therapy and they're not his clients. This is incredibly important. It is the pillar of this entire conversation, right? And even then, look at new media forms like Dr. Stutz with Jonah Hill or couples therapy. That is explicitly therapy, but it's filmed, edited, and released. So that is explicitly therapy, and yet it's being put out in the public. So this privacy concern that he's bringing up right now is also being called into question of being like, well, if a client agrees to not having their conversations private, can you breach that for a greater good, for example, of helping other people by getting to view the therapeutic session? And for example, with couples therapy, that's a very beloved show. People find a ton of healing in it, even though every single client on there has no privacy, like by and large. I imagine there's some level of privacy they get of like certain things that they can request to not be in the final footage, but it's pretty raw. If you've ever watched couples therapy, it's pretty intense what they talk about. Like there's not a lot of holding back in that episode, and it is therapy, and it's being publicly turned into TV. So what do we do about that? And the issue is, I don't know. It's all ethically gray, which is why we have to rely on ethics boards to try to help us figure this out as a profession. Psychology ethics serves three primary functions. First and foremost is the protection of the client. First and foremost. And these are hierarchical, which means the protection of the client does come first. The second is the protection of the practitioner. That is the second most important thing. And the third most is the protection of the field of psychology as a whole. This is why you can get in a lot of trouble if you're doing unethical stuff with like disseminating unempirical information as a practitioner, or if you're encouraging that sort of stuff. This is why Jordan Peterson got in so much trouble because he is a clinical psychologist who was mocking Elliot Page and basically calling out his medical practitioners as basically like barbaric. He got in trouble for a similar thing of essentially misrepresenting the field of psychology. All right, here is a criticism that I had of Dr. K.
Right, and I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Don't make promises that you can't make, and if you make them, keep them.
I'm so desperate for human interaction that I'll have, paid people's rent just so they'd be my roommate. So I'd have someone around, If you put yourself in the shoes of any other human being, I don't know that they'll really spend 2 years with me unless there's...
So Reckful, I'm not counting on them to spend 2 years with you.
So what are you counting on?
I'm counting on myself. It's the only
that you'll spend 2 years with me. Yeah, that I believe. That I can believe.
Especially as somebody who has endeared yourself to a mentally ill person to such an extent.
And then the next episode where they do a stream together, he goes, hey, I kind of jumped the gun. We talked about this off stream as well. I really shouldn't have committed to being in your life for the next 2 years. Okay.
The last time we talked on stream, we had a conversation about abandonment. And then I made a very bold claim because I got emotional as well. And I felt like I wanted to be there for you so that you no longer felt this way. And I think sometimes what happens amongst people is that they have different kinds of complexes, and I have them too. And one of the things that happens with me is when I see someone hurting, I want to make them better. And sometimes I will, in that moment, say whatever I think I can to make them feel better, but sometimes that's irresponsible. We had a DTR conversation. You guys know what that is? You know what a DTR?
What's a DTR? I don't even know what that is. What's a DTR?
DTR.
Damn it, tell us.
Define the relationship.
Oh, okay.
right? And so I think it's important, right? Because like people, like I want to be careful about what we're doing on stream. I want to be, we're here to help people, but I also don't want to send the wrong message, and I also don't want to leave people hanging.
He was saying that he wanted to be there for me for the next 2 years, and that but the problem is that he kind of said it in a flurry of emotion. I don't know if flurry is a good word.
Yeah, so we also did talk about, whether you want me to be your actual therapist and what that would entail.
You will notice, foreshadow, this is the entire thing that the reprimand focuses on. This exchange. That is the entire thing that this reprimand is about, just to be very clear. Now, the question that you need to be asking yourself again is, are they concerned that he's harming Reckful, Dr. K? Is Dr. K being a bad practitioner himself, or being harmed in some way, or doing some sort of ethic thing that compromises him? Dual relationships. Or is he harming the field of psychology in this representation? Okay. That's what we have to figure out. What does the ethics board think is going on? Because Max and everybody who's super hate-pilled on Dr. K would say that he's doing all three, but especially the first one, right? He was not reprimanded for the first one, which is harming Reckful. He was also not reprimanded for the second one, just so we're fully aware. A lot of people who have been talking about this Dr. K shit just keep saying, it looks like therapy, so it's obviously therapy. And it's like, no, that's not how this works, actually. Just because if I go and talk to my husband because he's crying and he's had a hard day, but I'm also a licensed practitioner, am I giving my husband therapy in that moment? What about if it's my friend? What if I'm on the bus and I see some girl crying and I go sit next to her and I see how she's doing and she ends up like telling me a bunch of personal stuff, and we have a really good conversation and I encourage her and I maybe redirect her to some resources to help her out with her anxiety and depression or whatever the fuck is going on for her on the bus. Is that therapy because I'm also a practitioner? And it's so important for people to understand this question, because essentially people who said, yes, it's obviously therapy, are then also to some degree saying psychologists shouldn't have deep relationships with their friends and family. And if they do, they better be clear to make sure that their friends and family know that they're not their therapist, and they have to be really cautious, and they have higher ethical standards, so they really shouldn't be doing that. And it's like, who the fuck else do you want to have a deep conversation that is helpful about your emotions with? Your friend who's a psychologist, or some bum on the street? And the people arguing this are unironically saying it's more ethical for the bum on the street to go and talk to somebody and help them than for a psychologist to go and talk to them and help them, even though they're not doing therapy in that moment, which is insane. Liability. There is a very, very, very big issue that Max takes with me for bringing up liability.
That rule is there to protect vulnerable people, not practitioners.
And insurance companies from liability suits. I would argue.
I think it is such a damaging thing to say. I can't believe you're saying that. It is so bad for people to hear that.
When people were talking about Dr. K, a lot of people talking about it had probably taken a bachelor's in psychology or had taken a couple of 100-level courses where typically you do actually learn some level of psych ethics. The problem is that what you learn at a bachelor level of psych ethics is almost always, and ethically should be, the most conservative interpretation of how you're supposed to engage as somebody trained in psychology or as a psychologist. This is because we don't want people with bachelors who have a bachelor in psychology being the most ethically liberal with themselves when they have the least amount of training. And the problem is that almost everyone who talked about Dr. K's situation, by and large, seemed to not have a complex grasp of how psychological ethics work, which is an entire field of study that there was entire disciplines dedicated to just focusing on psych ethics. So to act like it's just so simple is asinine. For example, a lot of people would say, can you accept gifts from a client? Most people would say, no, of course not. However, the APA put out a large article explaining absolutely there are instances where you should, and it's more ethically solid to receive gifts from your client, because many clients culturally or just based on that person's personality are going to be more harmed by the rejection of the gift than the giving of the gift. But if you've only taken really basic ethics, they're just going to tell you not to accept gifts, which is a good thing, by the way, because you don't want a decently untrained person being liberal with ethics. Just to be very, very clear. There are lots of recommendations about how therapists should act that are basically about liability, because what they don't realize is that the ethics that the CPA or the APA set out for psychologists is also what psychologists are accountable to when they register for insurance for malpractice. And so there is a number of conservative recommendations within different ethics things based on fundamentally liability. For example, most people would agree that a psychologist should never be texting or engaging with their client outside of therapy hours, that it's inappropriate, right? And in general, the reason for this is twofold. Number one, the type of people most likely to try to stretch that rule are oftentimes people who are the least considerate of their client and are often reaching out to the client for themselves because it feels good. Number two is liability. If you were engaging with your client, taking phone calls with them, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of engagements going on that are off the record, that are not being properly tracked and are not properly regulated, that if something happens with the client and a suit comes in, you're going to be caught with your pants down, right? Which is why there's also liability. And in a large conversation that I had with Max, I outlined that I really, really hate when people moralize liability issues rather than protecting client. I think we should protect a client, which is why in general, I don't think anyone should be taught to text a client. However, there's an entire treatment modality built around therapists who essentially are available 24/7. Just look at Marsha Linehan's original DBT model. She basically said, yeah, fuck the ethics here. It really, really limits when we have borderline high crisis clients. If we're not 24/7 available, we just are. And they basically negotiated with the ethics board. She got it all cleared. And it's just found ethical. You just need to be conservative about it, super cautious, and make sure that it's not going to be harmful to your client when you're doing it, which is why, in general, the conservative advices probably don't, unless there's some extenuating circumstance. And nobody in this space wanted to hear that. They don't want to hear that because everyone has a 100 level understanding of psych ethics, I guess, and then therefore feels confident to weigh in on incredibly murky, complicated issues. Super annoying. And Ayurveda. Another common criticism, this came more from Chud, is that he was being unethical and problematic because he was promoting pseudoscience. You might notice that in the review of his behavior, there's no mention of their concern about pseudoscience. So you're f***ing wrong on that one as well, just as a heads up. What have people's responses been? I guess let's start with this document. I'm not going to go over it in all of detail. I'm going to TLDR it. I will link this document in the description if you'd like to read it. Basically, this is the final after 2 years of investigation. And so for anyone being they didn't do a good enough job, they probably didn't look at his stuff. If you believe that, then you should have zero trust at all in the institution of psychology. Just to be clear, if you think after 2 years, the board of ethics was just we just watched 2 videos and we're meh, it's fine, then I don't know what they're getting paid for. And I don't know, you should never exceptionally psychology if that's how you think the institution's going. But I can tell you, that's not how this works. Ethics boards are exceptionally thorough, exceptionally thorough. So this is basically saying, this is who's getting reprimanded, Dr. K. Findings of the fact. This basically, before anyone says, findings of the fact doesn't mean everything listed here is them saying you're bad. Everything listed here, every fact listed here means that you did that thing wrong. It's just a list of the relevant facts to the reprimand. That's it. It's neutral. All right. According to AMA Ethical Opinion 8.12. All right. So this is physicians who participate in the media can offer effective and accessible medical perspectives, leading to healthier, better informed. However, ethical challenges present themselves when the worlds of medicine, journalism, and entertainment intersect in the context of media. So this is just the ethics that they're considering with this reprimand. Okay, so this is just talking about basically you have a ethical obligation to your patients, the public, and the medical profession at large. those three, right? And that their conduct as professionals when they're in a public space and especially public media facing reflects on their field, on themselves, and on other medical professionals within the field. And there's a certain burden of duty and like what that looks like. They should always remember that they're physicians first and foremost and uphold medical profession. They should encourage audience members to seek out qualified physicians, which Dr. K does, by the way, all the time. Be aware of their medical training and how that affects people who view what they say. So when a medical doctor says, if you eat computers, it saves you from cancer, you're more likely to believe it if it's a doctor saying it than if I said it. They don't, as of the evidence to this day that I am aware of, okay? And you also need to disclose conflicts of interest, right? So a conflict of interest, for example, is the fact that he owns a coaching program, but he also is a live streamer who gets viewers, right? Who highlights mental health needs. However, he's explicit about the conflict of interest because he says, hi, I own Healthy Gamer, and I do these live streams. Done. He's announced and disclosed conflict of interest. Now you know that if you sign up, if you watch a stream and then sign up to his coaching, you're engaging with both of the things that he is involved in. And in some part, you might have ended up at Healthy Gamer because you watched a stream. In fact, most likely you did. That's a conflict of interest. Now, to be clear, conflict of interests aren't unethical unless they're abused or done unethically or like not being disclosed, okay? So he does interview styles with lots of large personalities. The interview playlist has 148 videos. You can definitely believe that at least the researchers for this had to watch probably every single one of them, which is why it took 2 years. On or about December 4th, they started talking with Reckful. And so now they go through, Reckful talks about how he's got depression, bipolar, suicide, how he uses mushrooms, acknowledges that, Dr. K mentions that he'd be worried if someone on his stream committed suicide. And so he encourages Reckful to not do that. And he also offers for Reckful to reach out to him. Dr. K says, you can reach out to me if you're having thoughts of killing yourself. Again, these are statements of facts. They're not saying this is wrong. They're just stating the facts. At the very end, they'll state what he did wrong. Okay, so before you're like, so he did that wrong. No, that's not what this is saying. Then he talks about basically the interview. This is the big one where basically they go into the history of therapy. And he suggests that they meet every week for 4 to 8 weeks to address his loneliness. And then they basically have a third live stream for over 2 hours where they talk about suicide. They have another one, a fourth one. During this video, they talk about BPD. And Dr. K says that he would try to love Reckful for 2 years. They do another one, the fifth one, just a few days afterwards, where basically they're like, hey, oopies, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have said that I'm going to try to love you for 2 years. That wasn't, it's a bold claim. It's very irresponsible of me. Ooh, retcon. This is the thing, by the way, that I said from the very beginning was the only problem. And I said it was immoral, to be clear. I was very strong about it. And I said, I don't know if it's unethical to Reckful, because Reckful's not his client, but it's definitely immoral to do to somebody who you think is your friend. Obviously. That was my position. They connected again for 40 minutes, and Reckful mentioned that he would continue their conversations offline. On June 30th, Reckful's friend engaged with Dr. K to discuss Reckful's declining mental health. So this is privately, to be clear, this is a private conversation that they're listing here. Dr. K referred them to outpatient care and higher levels of care around emergency services. So essentially, this is something that we are aware of publicly. That's not included in here precisely, but essentially, Reckful's friends reached out because Reckful was very, very suicidal, and they wanted him to be, like, they didn't know what to do. He had been put in, like, lockup before for suicidality, and it always made it worse, and he was super afraid of going back to, like, a psych ward, basically, and they were asking what to do. And according to the facts of the finding, he basically referred them to getting him probably put into a psych ward, referred them to doing outpatient care. He basically said, these are the recommendations I would make for somebody who's suicidal. And it sounds like he did standard referral guidelines. So that means he did an expected job. They're not saying anything wrong here. Then Reckful died by suicide. Conclusions. The respondent has engaged in conduct that undermines the public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession. He is reprimanded, and it's imposed for each violation of the law listed in the conclusion. They agree that the approval of the consenter is left to the discretion of the board. As to any matter of consent order, left to the discretion of the board, then the respondent, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So basically, they have no right to appeal. This is basically saying Dr. K is aware of this entire thing. He has agreed to all the finding of the facts. He has agreed to everything that's outlined in here. He has to make sure that everyone who he works with in a professional capacity is aware of his reprimand. So there's just like a little bit of stuff in there. Now, it's super important to note in here. They do not say that he's done something unethical to Reckful. Nowhere. Undermining the public trust in the medical professional is that third one. It's not the first or the second. It's the third one. And this ethic is confusing to me, actually. This is something that I wish they would have made a little bit more clear. Because if they think that it undermines the public confidence of the medical professional, they could have made any requests of him. They could have told him how he has to do his content differently. They could have demanded that he take down a number of videos. They could have done anything. It's at their discretion. But they don't ask him to take down his videos, and I will show you, but they are still up. They're still up to this day. Like right here, healthygamer.gg, talking depression with Reckful. So that engagement, that last one where he promised to be with him for 2 years and then apologized later, was a threat to the medical professional, right? Embarrassed the medical professional to some degree. But not so much that they want the video taken down, not so much that they have any recommendations for future behavior. So what the fuck is this reprimand? To be honest, probably what it means is when they audited him entirely, they realized that Dr. K took this situation seriously enough. He saw it as an error already, and they were satisfied with any plans that he made as a response to correct this and prevent this from occurring again. Essentially, they found him satisfied. If we go to the Dr. K Healthy Gamer update about the reprimand. So we want to update you all. There was a complaint filed against Dr. K in February 2022, which is, if you'll notice, like right around the time that we were talking. So it's Max's for sure. Far before this complaint was filed, we took self-corrective actions to address the most problematic aspects of guest interviews. Dr. K's license has been reprimanded. This is something that they were required to publish, right, to anyone who knows them in any professional capacity. While this is disciplinary action, it does not come with any fines, penalties, or limitations of Dr. K's practice in medicine. It does not alter Dr. K's involvement with Healthy Gamer. This means they said his interviews are fine. They're fine. They're fine as is. It is ethical. It's not a problem. They didn't answer if it's therapy, but if it is therapy, it's ethical therapy. And if it's not therapy, then it's ethical psychoeducation, basically. Out of respect for Dr. K, they've kept things private and worked with the board instead. The board found that Dr. K acted within the standard referral guidelines, including referrals for outpatient high care. We read that with regards to Reckful's suicidal ideation. The board has found that the interviews with Reckful constitute conduct that undermines public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession. Again, that third one. The nature of Healthy Gamer interviews has been contentious for a long time. The interviews with Reckful started in 2019. Before this complaint was filed, we had already taken steps to change how we did interviews. We understand and respect the board's decision and thank them for their thorough and fair assessments. Okay, that means that this is it. That's his entire consequence. So anyone who's taking this away being like, wow, his peers, Dr. K's ethical, professional peers agreed that he did something egregious. No. If they thought he had done something egregious, there would have been fines. There would have been processes by which he had to be corrected. If they thought that his content itself was problematic, they would have told him so explicitly. In fact, it would be unethical for the ethics board to leave it ambiguous as to the steps needed to be taken to correct it if it was such a heinous action. Big shout out to a friend of the stream, Mr. Forethought. Now, to be clear, this is very meany. I am not targeting Dan at all, okay? I'm targeting everyone else. All right. He does a really good job of basically compiling a number of different reprimands, complainants, anything where boards have corrected various professionals. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up is so that you can have a really good idea of what it actually looks like when somebody does something really naughty. Relationship with a patient. This resulted in a license being revoked. What you'll notice and what's important to understand in this, and again, I'll link this whole thing so you can read it, is that they are explicit about what he did wrong and that his license was being taken away. It is unethical for them to not be explicit about the consequences of the reprimand. Now, if there's a fine, it has to be stated in the reprimand. If they have to do 15 days of diversity and inclusion training, it's listed in the reprimand. If you remember Jordan Peterson's reprimand, in there is that he has to submit himself to new training, and it has to be overseen, and blah, 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 blah. It's all in his reprimand. There is nothing that the board has asked Dr. K to do. That is really important. That means that a jury of his peers agreed with him that he had done something wrong in that moment, which is that he undermined public confidence in the profession, but that he had taken appropriate steps to correct it, that his content by and large was fine, that his conduct with Reckful was not unethical. It wasn't. This isn't a reprimand of him and Reckful's relationship. It's a reprimand for how he's representing psychology, which is that essentially it can lead to confusion. I'm going to cover some Seattle psychology.
Just because you have a psychiatrist or a clinician who is talking on the internet, live stream, with someone about their depression and their thoughts of suicide, that doesn't mean that it is a clinical service. For example, for myself, if a friend were to come to me, this isn't on.
Just because you think it looks like therapy doesn't mean it's therapy and doesn't mean that it falls under the ethical guidelines or protections of therapy.
Any data to support that. If anything, it was the opposite, right? So to consider Dr. K without any information as someone you can blame for Reckful dying by suicide, it seems like looking for someone to blame.
He's not responsible for Reckful dying. Every single person who insisted that he was responsible for Reckful dying was wrong, and you don't know what you're talking about.
So after Reckful died by suicide, someone complained to the state of Massachusetts State Licensing Board. The conclusion was that Dr. K, quote, has engaged in conduct that undermines the public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession. So let's break this down. He has engaged in conduct, these online live streams with Reckful, that undermined the public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession. So what does that mean? Well, it's a category of ethical codes that is very amorphous. I have looked into this a lot. When you read different experts and you read different authors and you read different guidelines, it's all over the board. There's a lot of range regarding what people consider to be undermining the public confidence in the integrity of the medical profession or the professions in mental health.
And importantly for here, it is ever evolving. It's the technology is, we're not up to date with it. The ethics boards are pretty slow. They're slow moving boats. We have no idea. And the worst thing that you can possibly do as a viewer is insist that the most educated professionals to be helping people and talking about psychology and talking to others, to insist that only the most educated people can't do it, but like Max can, is insane. So many of people's perspectives on Dr. K made me so angry. I just backed away from it because I wasn't ready for social media drama. And like I said, it was 10 days into my career. But my biggest regret about this whole Dr. K thing when I look back at it is that I wasn't ruthless against Max for being dumb and lying about psych ethics and knowing nothing about what he's talking about. And it's not, he says it's a family trade. This is not a knock on his dad or his grandpa. I have no idea if they would even agree with Max, but Max has no clue what he's talking about. When you take graduate level psych ethics courses, you will very quickly learn that regularly in your profession, you will have multiple ethical guidelines conflicting with one another, and you are taught like a 10-step process to try to reason through it, and you fucking hope that you make the right decision, and if it goes to an ethics board, you hope that they agree that you made the right decision. And I'm pretty staunch on the idea that I think it's really harmful that psychologists feel more afraid of correcting misinfo, of being like loud and proud about their opinions, because it can like reflect poorly on the profession, in large part because people, I think, give way too much credit to anyone being any type of expert, and they don't do enough thinking on their own. And now the best and brightest minds oftentimes aren't talking about this, and this is why I fucking love Jonathan Haidt, because he says that to all of it and talks about it anyways. And he has come at risk of his career multiple times as a result of it, and he's brave for doing so, and I think it's good. Dr. K, my biggest regret in all this is not standing up more staunchly for Dr. K. Dr. K did something wrong with Reckful at a moral level as a friend. He didn't do anything ethically and professionally wrong with Reckful. It's so sad that 2 years ago, so many people had such a high motivation to tear down a person who is brilliant. God, if his therapy sessions are anything like his interviews, he's a fantastic therapist. He's brilliant. Holy shit. Probably the biggest ethical concern there is that he makes therapy look so incredible. And then they go and see like a random therapist and like, this is not nearly as good as Dr. K's interviews. I wish I had stood up for Dr. K way more. I love him. I think he's brilliant, genuinely brilliant. And the APA agrees with me because they recently just like signed him on to promote specifically his healthy gamer coaching stuff. They love it. They love that shit. So I'm sorry if you disagree with me, that's fine, but you're fighting up against the entire ethical institution of the Massachusetts Medical Board and the APA. So I guess have your fight with them. I don't know what else to tell you.
But we would assume that the board were very careful about how they implemented the, and 2 years of it. Plus, Dr. K agrees with this. And they also did not tell him he had to take any content down, which leads me to believe that they think that the content is okay as long as he does things to explain, or maybe the disclaimers in the description of the episodes are clear or something. So they're not saying that episode is unethical. They're just saying, look, you're doing things, or you did a thing 4 years ago that undermines the public confidence in our profession. I'm guessing, this is just a guess, is that they probably said you should have been way more clear, especially in that one meeting. Maybe you have an addendum at the end or something clear in the description that very thoroughly addresses the nature of the relationship between you and Reckful. They're saying that relationship was fine and you didn't do anything wrong, but you weren't clear to the public regarding what the relationship was. And the reason why I'm speculating in this way is because I saw a lot of speculation online that didn't match up with what was in the report. People saying that they were reprimanding him for boundary violations or something like that. It doesn't sound that way to me, particularly because they did not say he engaged in conduct that blurred boundaries. They didn't say that. They clearly investigated it pretty thoroughly. If they found that, they would have said it, and they didn't say that.
So I don't want to like run around and go like, Nanananabooboo, I was right. I was right. It's because I was informed on the ethics. I read through them and I was able to evaluate, and that I was like, I'm not sure on was basically answered in this to some degree, although what is therapy was not very clearly answered. But whatever's going on with his videos, they're fine. They're not a breach, which is... For everyone who thought that this was like, this is shutting Dr. K down, this is such a big deal. This in many ways is a precedent that people might cite back to allow more of this content to be made. Just to be very clear, this is the opposite of what you think it is. Max did this as a way to like end Dr. K, end any content like this, went on this big diatribe about how he's like a moral crusader, and a whole bunch of people jumped on the bandwagon, and you were all f***ing wrong. You were all wrong. The ethics board has disagreed with you, and this might be cited as a precedent. I could be wrong. I can't see the future, but it at least establishes that whatever Dr. K is doing is not a violation of a medical ethic. You can expect to see other psychologists probably starting to do similar content, which, to be fair, I think is mostly good, and if you see people doing this type of content that are a registered psychologist and you see super problematic behavior, you should continue to report it to ethics boards so that ethics boards continue having to deal with psychologists in the social media field so we can get better, crisper, outlined ethics to follow so that psychology as a field can handle social media better. Yay, Dr. K. I'm sorry I didn't defend you more robustly, and I'm sorry that I didn't sing your praises more loudly 2 years ago, but you can bet on me to continue to praise you. Bye for now. If you enjoy my stuff, you can always support me on YouTube by becoming a member. You get little emojis. They're so cute. You can also support me on Twitch at any time. You can go into my chat and type !Prime, and it'll prompt you. Lastly, I have a Patreon. I've been increasingly putting kind of some of my thoughts that I have in the day. So I kind of do like thoughtful vlogs. There's a lot more of that on Patreon. So if that interests you, you get access to it at any level. And I will catch you on the flippity flip. Bye, guys. Think well, because